Have you ever met someone who barely speaks, but seems to understand everything? They're not trying to impress anyone. In fact, they don't usually stand out that much. They observe more than they talk. They listen more than they respond. And when they finally say something, it just makes sense. We usually imagine intelligent people in a very different way. Someone quick, articulate, always ready with an answer. But in reality, that's not always how it works. Many people with a high level of intelligence have very subtle behaviors, almost invisible, small things, in everyday life, in how they think, how they observe, how they react. And it's exactly in these details that intelligence begins to show. In this video, you'll discover 5 of these behaviors, and some of them may seem simple, or even a little unusual, but they can reveal a much deeper way of thinking than it seems. And maybe you'll recognize yourself in more of them than you expect. The first habit of people with a high IQ is something many people misunderstand: spending time alone. People with a more analytical mind usually feel comfortable on their own. But this isn't about rejecting others. It's about what's happening inside their mind. While many people need constant stimulation, conversations, distractions, movement, this kind of mind does the opposite. It slows down and begins to process ideas, past conversations, possibilities. It's as if the thinking never really stops, even when everything around them is quiet. And that silence isn't empty. It's where things start to make sense. It's where deeper connections begin to form. That's why, many times, this kind of person prefers to be alone, or spends more time thinking than speaking. Not because they're disconnected from the world, but because they're trying to understand it. And from the outside, it may look like isolation. But on the inside, it's a mind exploring patterns, questioning, trying to find meaning, even in the simplest things. The second habit may seem simple at first: curiosity. But it's not a common kind of curiosity. People with a more analytical mind don't just ask questions. They question what everyone else accepts, things most people overlook. They stop and pay attention to: why did that person react that way? Why does this work like this? And no one questions it. Why does something seem so obvious, but doesn't really make sense when you think about it? It's as if their mind is always searching for something beyond what's visible. It's not just about wanting to know more. It's about wanting to understand better. And this happens all the time. In simple conversations. In everyday situations. In small details that almost no one notices. While most people are just living in the moment, some people do something different. They observe. They try to understand what's underneath. They compare behaviors. They connect ideas, almost automatically. And over time, that curiosity becomes something more. It turns into understanding. The third habit may seem strange to many people: feeling comfortable saying, "I don't know." For a lot of people, not knowing something feels uncomfortable. There's an almost automatic need to respond, to be right, to stay in control. And if you think about it, we all know someone like that. The person who always has an answer for everything, even when they clearly don't. Who speaks with confidence, but not always with accuracy. But here's something interesting. People with less knowledge often feel more certain than they should. In psychology, this is known as the Dunning-Kruger effect, a pattern where people with less knowledge tend to overestimate what they know. More analytical minds tend to do the opposite. They recognize what they don't know. And that's not insecurity. It's clarity. The more someone thinks, the more they realize how complex things really are. How one answer often leads to more questions. And because of that, saying, "I don't know," isn't a problem. It's part of the process. Because recognizing what you don't know is what allows you to truly learn. And that changes everything. Instead of defending opinions, they begin to explore possibilities. Instead of trying to be right, They try to get closer to the truth. And from the outside, this may look like doubt. But in reality, it's a much more sophisticated way of thinking. The fourth habit is something many people don't expect: a sharper sense of humor. But it's not just any kind of humor. It's not about simply telling jokes or trying to be funny. It's something more subtle. People with a more analytical mind tend to notice connections that most others miss. And very often, that's exactly where their humor comes from. From linking ideas that, at first glance, don't seem related at all. For example, in a normal conversation, someone says something simple, and this person responds in an unexpected way. Something surprising. But when you think about it for a second, it makes perfect sense. Or when someone turns an ordinary situation into something funny, just by shifting the perspective. This kind of humor doesn't happen by accident. It depends on recognizing patterns, breaking expectations, and connecting ideas quickly. And that's why sometimes someone says something, and you only get it a second later. But when it clicks, it makes complete sense. Behind that, there's a mind that is constantly associating ideas, turning patterns into something light, unexpected, and intelligent. And maybe you know someone like that. Or maybe it's you. The fifth habit is one of the most subtle, and also one of the most revealing: observing more than speaking. In many situations, there's an almost automatic pressure to respond quickly, to fill the silence, to give an opinion, to stay involved all the time. But some people do the opposite. They pause. Before they respond, they observe the tone of voice, facial expressions, reactions. They notice what's being said, and often what isn't being said. For example, in a group conversation, while some people are focused on talking, this person is watching. Who avoids eye contact? Who changes the subject? Who agrees without really agreeing? Or in a meeting, while everyone is trying to defend their ideas, they're trying to understand what's really going on, what's actually happening beneath the surface. And that's what creates something powerful: context. And because of that, when this person finally speaks, what they say tends to be clearer, more precise, and often more impactful. Because it doesn't come from reaction. It comes from analysis. From the outside, this may look like silence. But in reality, it's a mind gathering information, organizing, understanding the environment on a deeper level. And maybe that's what connects all of these behaviors. They don't always look like intelligence. Sometimes they look like silence. Sometimes like doubt. Sometimes like distance. But often, they're just different ways of thinking. At the end of the day, intelligence isn't always loud. It doesn't always show up in the person who talks the most, or always has an answer. Very often, it's quiet, in the person who observes before speaking, who questions before accepting, who admits when they don't know, and keeps trying to understand. Because in the end, intelligence isn't about having all the answers. It's about how you see the world, how you interpret what's happening around you, and the curiosity to keep exploring, even when no one is watching. And maybe the most interesting part is this: some of these signs go unnoticed. Sometimes, the most intelligent minds are also the quietest ones. If you enjoyed this kind of content, you can subscribe for more. And I'm curious, do you see yourself in any of these habits?